Everyone, my name is Lisa Howell. I'm going to share my screen real quick. All right. So I am the Education Advocate Program Coordinator for the state of Kansas. I'm working with Families Together, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Families Together, what we do, how we can help you as professionals, as family members, and then talk about some IEP basics. So Families Together has been the parent training and information center for Kansas for over 35 years. Every state has at least one parent center. The parent centers are established through the federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that's the same law that provides for services under IFSPs, the infant toddler services, and then IEPs, those individual education programs. And as the Parent Training Center, we provide training, resources, individualized consultation, and emotional support to families in Kansas, which include a son or daughter with disabilities. We serve families that have children from birth to age 6, and families whose children are only served as gifted are included in our service delivery because they are served by special education services in Kansas. So in 2008, we also became the Family to Family Health Information Center for Kansas. And this grant expanded our work with families from just helping them in school environments and that transition from infant to toddler to school services to helping them navigate the healthcare challenges they may face with their son or daughter. Some of the children whose families are served by the Health Information Center may not be children with disabilities, but have special healthcare needs. So children with asthma or intermittent mental health challenges. All of our staff are parents, family members, and education advocates for kids with disabilities. We've walked in the shoes of parents and professionals, and we understand those frustrations and joys that you experience as the students access that special education and medical services. So this is our mission statement, and it is our goal to give parents the tools they need to be their students' own best advocate. And you'll notice again that we use the term exceptionalities because we serve gifted as well. So our staff offers information through direct assistance to parents and education advocates and professionals. This assistance from an experienced parent or family member is one of the most valued services that we offer. We can help improve the IEP, help parents and professionals understand the law. We can refer them to community services, or we can just listen and offer that ear. Oh, sorry, guys. So real quick, our learning objectives. We are going to talk about understanding the purpose of the IEP, gain a better understanding of that process, including the present levels, understand the concept of least restrictive environment, and explore how to use person-centered planning as part of that process. And then hopefully leave with knowledge and tools that can help you work as part of your child's IEP team. So the Kansas's CAN vision with that KSDE has made is to lead the world in the success of each student. To prepare Kansas students for lifelong success through rigorous, quality academic instruction, career training, and character development according to each student's gifts and talents. And this is really important to note that we're not only looking at the academic instruction, but we're looking at that transition from high school to post-secondary, the career training. And we're also looking at character development, those skills that help you be a productive member of society. So when your team is developing your student's IEP, the goal is to develop ways your child can access and progress in the general education curriculum. And you'll hear this phrase several times tonight because this is what it's all about. All students are general education students first. And so when we write this IEP, or even if we do a 504 plan, even general education interventions, it is all about making sure that students are able to access and progress in the general education curriculum. So many children successfully learn at school, but some children need extra help in order to succeed, and a few children need that intense support. MTSS, the multi-tiered system of supports, is a framework for school districts to align their resources to support the learning successes of each child, regardless of the level of support they need. These are going to be your general education interventions. The MTSS framework can be used to design school-wide support for children in the areas of reading, math, and behavior. So Tier 1 interventions are going to include the instruction and support that is provided to all children. Tier 2, which is supplemental provisions, serves students who are needing more help. So extra instruction and support, usually provided in small groups. Tier 2 services are not more of the same things offered in Tier 1. That's part of the importance of good data collection and review, so that teams can identify the areas of need and try different strategies to help the students. These are going to be your small groups, your small group pullouts, your different levels for reading groups and math groups, maybe some small group social work help. Tier 3 is going to be intensive supports for children who need that intensive support and more individualized support in order to succeed. This is going to be extra instruction and support. Tier 3 is not special education. Tier 3 services and data collection may lead to the need for a comprehensive evaluation, but it's not the same thing. Students with disabilities may need supports in any or all of the tiers. The tiered system is fluid, meaning that students can move up and down. And a student may receive tiered supports and also have an IEP. So this would be what is going to happen if sometimes you hear the word SIT team, student improvement team. That is part of that Tier 3 support. So for starters, an IEP is a commitment of the services that your child will receive. An IEP will outline what a student will learn in the next timelines, how the student will learn the skills, and where the delivery of services and support will take place, who will be responsible for helping your child, and other supports and services needed to help your child learn. An individualized education program, an IEP, is an annual written document which describes the unique educational needs of a child who has a disability and needs special education services, and how those needs are going to be met. The IEP explains how our child gets from here to there. It is a legal document, and it must be written so that everyone on the team can understand it, and someone from another school could pick it up and implement it. The IEP has a number of purposes. It enables parents and the school to be equal participants. It's a management tool. It's an evaluation device. It sets forth a written commitment of time and services, and it ensures compliance. So while curriculum is determined at the district level, the way the student accesses the curriculum is determined by his or her IEP team. So there's that word again, accessing. Everything on the slide is negotiable, meaning that everything can be individualized and should be individualized for each child. And we're going to explore these different areas throughout the training. So if we have a student that we believe needs special education services, we are going to request an initial evaluation. And the initial evaluation has two purposes. It is to determine if the child has an exceptionality and needs special education and related services, and then to determine the student's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And it's important to note the functional performance language here. The evaluation must yield more than simply academic achievement. It must also determine the present levels of social and behavioral needs. What we are looking for at that initial evaluation is to meet the needs, look at the present levels, and again, more than academics, their social skills, how they're functioning, and everywhere from how they navigate the building, those executive functioning skills, time management, self self-regulation. All of those need to be included in those present levels. So here's an example of an evaluation request letter. We have a guide to special education, and this is in that guide. And I can absolutely give that to be sent out to you afterwards with this copy of the PowerPoint slides. And we would want to address this to the school psychologist, the principal, and the child's teacher. This just basically says, this is my name. And this one says appointed education advocate, but you can put parent on there. We want that educational decision maker to write this letter. And we want to formally request that they be evaluated for special education services. And then we want to list what educational services or evaluations we think that they need, whether that be speech, occupational therapy, academic evaluations, functional behavioral assessment is a good one to ask for if there's behaviors present. That second paragraph is going to be the why of why we think that our child needs an evaluation. So we can put in there that we do not feel they're progressing in the education, in this general education curriculum, that their reading assessment scores have not made significant progression or no progression at all. And then in that last paragraph, we want to put in there that sentence is very important. I understand that I will receive a prior written notice within 15 school days of my request. And this is one of the biggest reasons that we want to request an evaluation in writing. When you request it verbally, too often it can be forgotten, pushed aside. The teachers can say, we'll just work harder with her. They had a bad test day. But when we request it in writing, the school is required by law to respond to you in writing within 15 school days, saying, yes, I agree to evaluate and ask for your consent to evaluate, or saying, no, we don't agree to evaluate, and this is why. And I guarantee you that schools are not going to put on that prior written notice that we're just going to work harder with her. So that's one of the reasons why we want to put that request in writing. So we think that our child has a disability and needs special education services. We have sent in our written request for evaluation. The school has said, yes, we agree to evaluate, and we sign our consent on the prior written notice called a PWN for those evaluations to begin. So from the time you sign your consent, the school has 60 school days to complete the evaluation, to determine eligibility, to have, and then if they are eligible, to have the IEP meeting and to implement the IEP. And those evaluation results will be used to develop an IEP for an eligible child. Now, there are 13 categories in which a child could qualify for special education services. Of those 13 categories, exceptionalities is what they're called, only 2 of them require a medical diagnosis, and that is other health impairment and orthopedic impairment. Every other exceptionality does not require a medical diagnosis before the evaluation. Just as they do not require a medical diagnosis, just because we have a medical diagnosis does not mean they will automatically qualify for an IEP. The key point is that there has to be educational concerns. So we're looking at a disability that affects their education in school, accessing the general education curriculum. So our IEP team, we have done the evaluation, our child is eligible, we've held the eligibility meeting, and now we're going to get to know who the IEP team is. So IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that federal law, specifies the legal requirements for the IEP team. They are the parents or the educational decision maker. And there are 5 definitions for an educational decision maker under special education law, Kansas law. That is the biological parents, the adoptive parents, a court-appointed guardian. And so this means guardianship. If a court-appointed guardianship is issued, the child will not be in DCF custody. The 4th one is a person acting as parent, that's if a student is placed by DCF in a relative home. So a relative would be grandma or step parent, aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, sister. They have special education rights. And the 5th person is an education advocate. Foster parents can be the educational decision makers, but only if they are appointed as the education advocate by Families Together. If a child is in foster care and they are placed in a foster home, the case manager for that case can never be the educational decision maker, the special education decision maker. So if a child is in KVC care, a KVC case manager cannot be the educational decision maker. And the same with the other contracting agencies. And if they are placed in a foster family, the foster family has to be a trained education advocate, and again, appointed by Families Together. Also, if the foster family or someone that wants to be the educational decision maker that's not the parent, the biological or adoptive parent, works for the school, they cannot be the educational decision maker either. It's considered a conflict of interest. All right, so we have the parent, someone that meets one of those 5 definitions of parent under Kansas special education law. Not less than one of the student's general education teachers, not less than one of the student's special education teachers, someone who understands how the evaluation results will affect instruction. So that's usually the school psychologist. A representative of the school who is qualified to provide or supervised specially designed instructions, knows about the general education curriculum, and knows about the school resources. So that's usually an administrator. And others who have knowledge or special expertise about the student. So this can be foster parents, case managers, therapists. You can invite whomever you wish to the IEP meeting because people who have that special expertise or knowledge about the student needs to be a part of that. And then the student at age 14 isn't required to be invited also, but they can absolutely be invited at a younger age if the parent or special education decision maker wish them to. Okay, so the first step in the IEP, we're going to look at who is the student. So the IEP must include the strengths of the student and address the concerns of the parent. This is going to be in our present levels that we're talking about right now. They're going to talk about the student's strengths. what they want in life now and in the future. So what they want in a school day, and also what they want after high school. What do they struggle with from day to day? And what are resources in the school and community to help them prepare for life after high school? The first step in writing the IEP is to observe and know their present levels, and this is the foundation which the IEP is developed. They must be observable, they must be measurable, written in understandable language, and they must be addressed in the IEP. So all of the needs that are in the present levels, and sometimes I like to go through and highlight the needs with a highlighter. They must be addressed somewhere else in the IEP with a goal, with an accommodation, a modification, or a service. They also have to include the strengths and the concerns of the parent. This is a great, I am sorry, my dog is not liking the fact that he is in his bed while I'm on here. I apologize for the barking. Um, so Life Course Framework is a great tool to kind of see where the student is at and get those present levels, both from an adult perspective and from the student perspective. Everybody gets what the good life is. We just don't typically ask the person. So what kinds of things do you think your student, the student you're working with, want or don't want? Sometimes it's important to start at a point that you don't want because we may not know what they want. And I have to tell you, sometimes when I ask a child this question, it can be heartbreaking, the answers I hear. I don't want to sit alone at lunch. I don't want to feel stupid when it's my turn to read in the classroom. So sometimes asking those questions of what you don't want to happen in your school day is a good place to start so we can find the things that we do want. This is just an example of one of the portfolios that asks about what people like and admire. It asks about what they believe is important. And then we have just a couple quick examples of that being filled out. This is Leah's one of my coworkers, and Sean is her son. Just some examples of how to fill out those strengths and strategies to support, and what is important to the family member. So again, like we said before, all children are general education children first, and we're looking at that access to the general education. So in doing that, we need to see what our peers are learning and doing. What is that grade level curriculum? What projects are they working on? This also includes extracurricular events, field trips, school dances, activities, clubs. All of these are open for our special education children because they are all open to our general education children. And we need to look at all of these things and see what services, what help, what accommodation our student needs in order to have all of the general education curriculum and experiences that the students are having. This is an awesome skill. Also, it's called the College and Career Competency Wheel, and KSDE has adapted this to look at those soft skills for career readiness and a lot of the interpersonal executive functioning skills. If you go to this website, you can hover over any of these executive functioning skills on here, like self-regulation, and it will take you to a resource that gives examples of how you can teach that to different levels of kids, to elementary children, to middle school children, to high school children. It can give examples of goals, accommodations, and different supports in order to teach those things. All right, so we've talked about our present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. We have our our students' strengths listed. We have their preferences, their interests, their needs, and the parent input. And our next step is we're going to look at what our student will learn. Okay, so goals are going to be formed from those needs in the present levels. Goals must reflect what the student can reasonably accomplish in a school year. They identify a specific area of focus, a need that was identified in that present levels. This can be reading, behavior, self-advocacy, peer relationships. They must include a direction or action, an increase, a decrease, or to maintain. They must reflect reasonable expectations, so the amount of change that will be made by the end of the IEP year. And they must be tied to the general education curriculum. So IEP goals are broken down into 4 parts, and parents and other educational decision makers do not need to know how to write IEP goals, but it is helpful to recognize a well-written goal. If a goal contains these 4 parts, we can understand what and how our student is learning. So let's look at each of these parts in a little bit more detail. So the behavior of the goal is what you expect your student to do. Sarah will read. Scott will initiate interaction. The condition is going to specify the manner in which the student will progress toward the goal, how it's measured, and it will involve the application of skills or knowledge. It specifies what materials will be used. It describes the setting, under what circumstances, and with how much support. So using second grade reading test. Use preferred words and coping strategies with fading adult support. The third component is the criteria. Criteria is going to identify how much, how often, or to what standards the behavior must occur. Criteria is often identified by numbers or percentages. So 80% of sight words with no less than 3 errors, 90% accuracy as measured by anecdotal records. And then lastly, the goal must contain a time frame. So May of 2025 or at the end of the IEP year. So this is a goal in 36 weeks. When presented with second grade reading material, Sarah will read independently 80 words per minute with no more than 3 errors. So our behavior can, if you feel comfortable, come off mute or put in the chat that Katie can read. What do you think the behavior is in this goal? So our behavior, again, is going to be what the child will do. All right, everyone's quiet today. Okay, so our behavior is going to be Sarah will read. And our condition is going to be with the materials and how it's done. So when presented with second grade reading material and that word independently, the criteria is going to be the numbers, how it's measured. So 80 words per minute with no more than 3 errors. And then that time frame is going to be in 36 weeks. So underneath our goals, it is possible to have short-term objectives or benchmarks. And these are statements that describe the steps to be taken to reach that annual goal. So it's going to break that annual goal down into usually 3 or 4 parts, and they usually match the grading period. So benchmarks and short-term objectives are not required unless the child is taking a DSLM, which is like an alternate assessment. That's really only about 2% of our population. But if they are on the IEP, it's a great way to measure their progress. So we don't usually want to say, oh, hey, we don't need these on here, because it's kind of like an added bonus. And we can always ask the school to put them in there if we think that it will benefit our child. All right, so we know who the student is, we know what the student is going to learn, and now we're going to look at what will help the student learn. So what does the student need in order to progress towards their goals and and progress in the general education curriculum? So the first thing we're going to look at is accommodations. Accommodations do not change the content to be taught. Instead, it changes the way that material is presented. It can involve many kinds of techniques, strategies, and support systems, and they can be provided for instructional methods, assignments and assessments, learning environments, special communication systems, schedules, and time frames. Some examples of these can be preferential seating, read alouds, a separate setting to take assessments, taking a break, visual schedule, use of a calculator, check-in, check-out, transition prompting, chunking of assignments. I know my youngest son, Gavin, when he reached middle school, he all of a sudden didn't want to ask for help anymore because he didn't want to stand out. So we had a sticky note as an accommodation. He would put a sticky note on the side of his computer, and it would notify the teacher to come over and check on him. So it's really anything that you can think of that might help your child access that general education curriculum. Modifications alter the curriculum to meet the needs of the students. It may be necessary in order for a student to be able to participate. The decision to make modifications, though, should not be made lightly, because it might imply that the student will not reach those general education standards that are there for all students. These can be anything from partial completion, so half a spelling list, fewer objectives, shorter or altered assignments or pages to read, every other math problem. And then the IEP must also consider different special factors. So children with limited English proficiency, we need to consider the language needs of the child. The communication needs, are they visually impaired? Do they need Braille? Is an interpreter needed for a child who's deaf or hard of hearing? Do we need an AAC device for someone who is nonverbal? And also, do they require assistive technology? We also have to consider behavior. There's a question in every IEP: does the student's behavior impede their own learning or the learning of others? And if it does, this part needs to be marked yes. If we're having behavior issues, it needs to be marked yes. And it's important to note that behavior issues do not always have to be throwing tantrums in the school or showing disrespect or cussing. We had one little girl who had such high anxiety that whenever the teacher would start calling on people to answer questions, she would bite her fingernails to where she was actually biting the tips of her fingers off. This is a behavior that is impeding her learning. And so we were able to ask for a functional behavioral assessment to be done to find out the triggers for that behavior and write a behavior plan to teach replacement behaviors. So it doesn't always have to be a negative behavior. The important wording in this is that it is impeding their learning or the learning of others. And when this is marked yes, we must use positive behavioral intervention strategies and supports, PBIS. And the law specifically uses the word positive. Behavior goals and plans should not be punitive in nature, but contain positive supports and strategies. And I mentioned a functional behavioral assessment before, and this is a tool that can be requested as part of an initial evaluation, a reevaluation, or whenever the behavior starts, whenever it starts to impact their learning or that of others. The process of learning about how the child develops problem behaviors will be addressed in that functional behavioral assessment, or FBA. And if we learn about the behaviors and know when and where they're most likely to happen, then we can plan positive strategies to teach new behaviors. The goal is to teach children how to manage their own behaviors. So additional services that need to be talked about in the IEP is transportation. Does my child's disability require special transportation for them? Physical and occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, sign language interpreters, and assistive technology. Another section is transition to adulthood. So students age 14 to 21 have to have this section that relates employment, future education and training, community participation, and daily living to their yearly IEP goals. Oh, sorry, guys. So an individualized healthcare plan is a written document developed by the parents, the student, the school nurse, and other school officials to meet the specific healthcare needs of the student. This is like if a student requires nursing care or help with a feeding tube. It's confidential information stored in an area which is easily accessible and can be a part of the IEP. All right, we know who the student is. We know what the student will learn, what will help them learn. So now we're going to look at who will help. This addresses supports and related services. Supports may be in the form of an in-service training for school personnel, related services providers. Peers can be a support, others in the school, other in the community. Transportation, behavior plans. The IEP team needs to consider the time of day the related services are scheduled. We don't want to take them out of those core classes for the instruction. But we also want to make sure that they have electives, because if a child doesn't want to go to school, then they're not going to go to school. We need to consider ways of monitoring that progress and procedures for reporting that progress to parents. Supplementary aids and services means those aids, services, and other supports that are provided in regular education classes, other settings, extracurricular and non-academic settings, to enable children with disabilities to be educated with non-disabled children to the maximum extent appropriate. Remember, our students are general education students first. This can include environmental needs, where they sit in the classroom or at lunch or in the auditorium, the levels of staff support needed, consultation, stop-in support, classroom companion, behavior specialist, planning time for collaboration needed by staff, specialized equipment needs, wheelchair, computer, voice synthesizer, augmentative communicative device, the pacing of instruction that's needed, breaks, more time, a home set of materials, presentation of subject matter, taped lectures, sign language, paired reading and writing with peers, the materials needed if they need tests scanned, notes into computer, shared note-taking, large print or braille, assignment modifications, shorter assignments, instructions broken down, self-management, calendars, teaching study skills, testing adaptations, reading the test to the child, modifying the format, extended time, social interaction and support needed, and then training for personnel. And finally, we're going to look at where the student will learn. Where does the student need to learn the skills required? So this is identified in least restrictive environment, the where of the IEP. By writing a student's IEP in a way that is tied closely with the general curriculum, LRE is more likely to be in that general education setting. There must also be a statement explaining why, if any, the student will not be participating with their general education peers. Unacceptable reasons for placing students in a more restrictive setting is lack of personnel, lack of space, lack of funding. So the LRE is determined at least annually. It's based on their IEP and is as close to the student's home as possible. The law requires that each district offers a continuum of placement options. The least restrictive environment is that regular education classroom. The next one down is special classes. So that's going to be resource rooms, pull-out services. The next one after that is special schools. That's going to be our alternative schools or behavior schools. Home instruction is going to be short term. It's not the same as homeschooling. Home instruction is provided by the school district and is utilized if a child's health would be jeopardized if they attended school. And each district or co-op is required to have this full continuum of services. The last one being that instructions in hospitals and institutions. That's going to be like our PRTF settings. Psychiatric residential treatment facilities. The goal is always to move the child into the least restrictive environment. It's not a one-way street if we're sent to a behavior or an alternative school. We need to set up a time when we are going to discuss how to get the child back into a lesser restrictive environment. Each district or co-op is required to have the full continuum, but each school is not. So if the IEP team determines that the services needed are in a behavior school, that can be anywhere in the district, not at the child's home school, but the district is required to provide transportation. And then we review and update the whole thing every year. IEPs do not expire. The last agreed upon IEP continues until everyone can meet and hold a new meeting. And an IEP meeting can be called at any time for any concern. And guys, I think I grabbed my wrong presentation because I don't have my case study on this one.
I can share my slides if you would like.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. I'll stop real quick. I apologize about that.
No worries.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeffrey is a third grade student at Warren Elementary School. He historically is a good student and gets along well with his peers. The second week of school, several calls home were made as Jeffrey began to have verbal outbursts in the classroom when he did not understand a subject that was being taught. So over the next month, these outbursts continued, causing him to have to leave the class several times and go to a separate setting to calm down. Jeffrey's parents began getting calls to come pick up Jeffrey early due to his escalating behaviors. And when Jeffrey's mom asked the principal in person if he thought Jeffrey might need an IEP, he replied that he would not qualify because his grades were good. All right, so when we look at this, we can go to the next screen. We're going to go way back to where we talked about evaluations. What are some steps that Jeffrey's parents can do?
Okay, so it looks like we have a comment in the chat from Michelle. They said they need to send a written request.
Yes, a written request for an evaluation. Very good. You can hit the next one, please. So what can they put in the written evaluation request letter as reasons for asking for an evaluation?
Okay. So another comment from Michelle, it looks like they said his behavior and the fact that they've been sending him home, which hinders his learning.
Absolutely. And another word acronym that we use in special education is FAPE. So accessing that general education is accessing FAPE, and FAPE stands for Free Appropriate Public Education. And that is a phrase that you can put in there that will kind of send up some red flags. It's one of those buzzwords. Great job. All right, next, please. So what type of assessments do you think that they should ask for? I see
We have,
behavior.
mhm,
Yep. A functional behavior assessment. Absolutely. I also think that asking for academic testing would be more than appropriate because there might be, if we weren't seeing behaviors before and now we are, there might be something in the curriculum that they're not able to access. So they might be having problems reading the material. They might be feeling all of a sudden like they're dumb, like they're stupid, because those are the words that, kind of go through our heads and especially our kiddos' heads. So asking for academic assessments would be a way to make sure that that it is fully behavior and not something they're struggling with academically. Great job, guys. All right, next. What data can they ask the school for to support the request? This is a little trickier one. So I always would ask for behavior reports. I believe that it's documentation of the number of times he's been sent home, absolutely. Um, and I think it's important that to note that when a student is sent home, it's technically a suspension. And sometimes we hear that word, oh, we don't want our kids suspended because that looks bad on the record. But if we have it documented as a suspension, then we have documentation that the suspensions are escalating. And in Kansas state law, it states a suspension is when a child is sent home for any part of the school day. So that is within the first 15 minutes of school, whenever the last 15 minutes of school. If they are sent home from school, that is considered a suspension. And Michelle, you're absolutely correct. Test scores, district test scores, school assessments, reading assessments, because the principal is quick to say that he gets good grades. Absolutely. Okay, next, please. And when can they expect a written response from the school? Yes, 15 school days. And school day is when general education students are receiving education. So that includes early release days, it includes half days. It does not include professional development days, holidays, parent or days when students are not in school.